Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
Thanksgiving always smells like guilt in our house. Roasted guilt with rosemary, cinnamon lies baked into the pie crust, and stuffing filled with unspoken history. My mom hums along to a scratched-up Nat King Cole vinyl that skips every 6 bars, but nobody seems to notice or care. It's all part of the scene, part of the holiday theater we put on year after year like good little actors with bruised hearts and fake smiles. I arrived around noon with a store-bought pecan pie and a bottle of red wine that I knew nobody would drink. My parents never liked red. They told me that 20 times before, but every year I bring it anyway, like a middle finger wrapped in foil. My mom hugged me at the door like she was welcoming in a coworker she barely knew. Her voice hit that high-pitched tone she reserves for people she pities or doesn't respect. "Look who finally decided to show up," she said, loud enough to echo through the damn hallway. I smiled and stepped inside, biting my tongue so hard it might have drawn blood. The house smelled like butter and burnt onions. My dad was in his recliner, beer in hand, shouting at football players he didn't know, wearing a team jersey from a state he's never visited. My younger brother, Eric, of course, was already there, stretched across the couch like he owned the damn place, tossing a football in the air and catching it without looking, like some half-assed commercial for mediocrity. He had that look on his face, the smug, well-fed, golden boy glow that never seemed to fade, no matter how many times he screwed up. I said hello. He barely nodded. That was fine. That's how it's always been. Eric doesn't need to try with anyone, especially not me. He's the kind of guy who can get arrested for drunk driving on a Wednesday night and be gifted a new watch by Saturday. He's the son who gets second, third, and fourth chances like candy on Halloween. I'm the daughter who was told once at age 19 that I was a little too independent. It was never meant as a compliment. Dinner started late, as usual. Mom overcooked the turkey again and blamed the oven, as if that poor appliance hadn't been doing its job just fine since the 90s. We sat around the old table, the one with the chipped leg Dad never fixed, pretending we liked each other. My mom asked me about work, not what I did, but whether I was still doing that tech thing, whatever that means. I told her I'd actually gotten promoted 2 months ago, and she nodded like I'd just said I switched shampoo brands. Then came the moment, the real reason we were all there. My dad stood up with that performative ahem he does when he wants attention but doesn't want to seem like he does. He cleared his throat, adjusted his belt like it was part of the ritual, and said, "Well, we've got something special for someone this year." The room got quiet in that pregnant, suffocating way, like everyone knew what was coming except the one person who was supposed to be surprised. I kept my face blank, though my jaw clenched under the table. He nodded at Eric. "Son, we've watched how hard you've worked this year, turning things around, really showing us what responsibility looks like." So, my mom clapped once like a game show hostess and gestured toward the front window. Outside, parked at the curb, was a shiny new black SUV with a red bow on top. It looked like the kind of thing you'd see in one of those holiday commercials where the husband surprises the wife with a luxury car and somehow nobody brings up the mortgage. My stomach flipped. Eric's jaw dropped, or at least he pretended it did. Then he grinned and said, "No freaking way," as he stood up to hug them both. They hugged him like he'd just returned from war. My mother actually teared up, her mascara slipping a little into her crow's feet, and said, "You earned this, baby. We're proud of you." My dad patted his back like he was slapping gold. I stayed quiet. My fork didn't move. The turkey on my plate had gone cold. Nobody looked at me. Nobody asked how I felt. Nobody noticed that I hadn't spoken in 10 minutes or that my hands were curled into fists under the tablecloth. That's when my mom turned to me, still wiping her eyes, and said, "Did you bring anything, honey?" I smiled, the kind of smile you reserve for people who say things like, "Why are you still single?" at weddings. I reached into my purse and pulled out a plain white envelope. No glitter, no cardstock, no script in gold cursive. Just a basic envelope, sealed. I laid it gently on the table next to my wine glass. "What's that?" my father asked, leaning forward slightly. "You'll see," I said. Their eyes flicked to it with mild curiosity, like it was a lottery ticket they weren't sure was worth scratching. And just like that, they went back to talking about the car. They thought that SUV was the biggest surprise of the day, but it wasn't even close. I don't remember the first time I realized I didn't matter as much. Maybe it was a slow drip, like water wearing down stone, or maybe it was a slap I somehow forgot how to feel. But I do remember the feeling that followed me around like a shadow that never needed the sun, a feeling of being tolerated, not celebrated, of being necessary but never cherished, of being called strong when what I really was alone. Growing up with Eric was like being on a stage where the spotlight never once swung your way, no matter how loud you sang or how brightly you dressed. He was 2 years younger, louder, sloppier, more charming in that boyish, excuse-laden way that makes adults call you a handful instead of a mess. My parents doted on him like he was the second coming of their own lost youth, while I was expected to quietly succeed and never ask for applause. When I was 13 and won a district-wide writing contest, my dad said, "That's cute," before going back to watching golf. Eric got a participation ribbon for soccer the same month, and we threw a barbecue in the backyard. I remember standing there, holding paper plates while my mom kissed his sweaty forehead and said, "You're my little star." I was 13, and I think something in me folded that day, not broke, not snapped, just quietly folded in, like paper becoming smaller and smaller until it fit inside a pocket nobody ever reached into again. By the time I was 17, I had a part-time job, a near-perfect GPA, and an ulcer. Eric, on the other hand, crashed my dad's Ford into a mailbox while drunk on cherry schnapps and ended up grounded for exactly 1 weekend. They said, "He's just a kid," as if that made it okay that he'd nearly killed someone. That someone could have been me, or them, or our neighbors. But all I remember was Mom stroking his hair on the couch like he was the victim. She looked at me, lips pursed, and said, "He's going through things. You're the strong one." That line, "You're the strong one," became their catch-all excuse for never showing up for me. When I needed help, I got lectures. When Eric needed help, he got money. When I called home crying at 20 from a dorm room I couldn't afford because my work-study check hadn't cleared, my dad said, "You gotta tough it out, kid. That's life." 2 weeks later, Eric got his third tattoo and posted a picture on Facebook with the caption, "Funded by the rents." I laughed so hard I actually choked. By the time I was 21, he had 2 misdemeanors under his belt and a record I helped erase, not with influence or manipulation, but with a check for $1,200 that I pulled from my savings account. When I told my parents later, thinking, maybe this time, they'd say thank you, my mom looked at me and said, "That's family, sweetie. You do what you can for each other." She never offered to pay me back. My dad just nodded, opened another beer, and said something about the Cowboys' offensive line. So I started keeping records, not because I wanted revenge, not at first, but because I needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. Gaslighting doesn't always come in dramatic scenes or screaming matches. Sometimes it's a mother telling you she never said that when you know damn well she did. Sometimes it's a father who insists you're exaggerating when really you're not even telling the worst of it. So I documented texts, emails, bank transfers, receipts, voice memos. A notebook I hid in the back of my closet like it was something shameful instead of the only real truth I had. I recorded things no one ever thought I'd remember, like the time they used my social security number to co-sign a loan for Eric's second car, which he later sold without telling me. Or the year I skipped Christmas because I couldn't afford the flight, and they said, "That's okay, we'll make it special for Eric." I watched from my cold apartment in Chicago while they posted pictures online of the family dinner, my place at the table empty, untouched, unacknowledged. My mom tagged the photo with all my babies together and didn't even notice I wasn't in it. The envelope they ignored at dinner? That thing was 10 years in the making. 10 years of ignored sacrifices and strategic silence. I wasn't planning on giving it to them. Honestly, I wasn't. It was more for me than for them, like a fire extinguisher in a house that everyone swore would never burn down. But then my mom, with that voice that could strip paint off walls, turned to me and said, "You've always been a little cold, haven't you? Maybe if you smiled more, you'd feel happier." And I swear to God, my hand moved before my brain caught up. I reached for the envelope, slid it across the table like it weighed nothing, though I knew it weighed everything. The words were still echoing in my ears, bouncing around like a ricochet I couldn't duck. Cold. Smile more. Happier. As if I had been built from steel and silence on purpose, as if I hadn't spent 2 decades trying to be warm in a house that never gave me heat. I wasn't planning to give it to them. I swear I wasn't. But then my mom said something that made my hand move all on its own. There's a certain silence that descends when a room collectively decides it would rather keep pretending than face the weight of something true. It's not the kind of silence that feels peaceful or earned. It's more like standing in a house with thin walls and knowing that nobody is going to answer the knock at the door, no matter how loud it gets. That's the silence we sat in after dinner, when the plates were mostly cleared and the wine had started to loosen everyone's mouths except mine. Eric, full of turkey and approval, leaned back in his chair like a king after a feast, tossing off one of his lazy grins as if the whole damn house had been built to honor him. My mother was still beaming, her mascara smudged under one eye from happy tears she insisted she never cried, and my father had started his second drink, bourbon this time, like celebration demanded something stronger. They were laughing about something Eric said. I don't even remember what it was, probably some story that didn't actually happen the way he told it, when the conversation took a sharp, familiar turn. My mom looked across the table at me, her face soft but her tone sharpened to a polite blade, and said, "You've always been so distant, Jenna. I mean, even as a kid, you were just off in your own little world. Sometimes I wonder if you even want to be part of this family." She didn't say it with venom, no, that would have made it easier to hate her for it. She said it with disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper than outright anger, because it carries the weight of a judgment made long ago and cemented into truth. My father didn't jump in to defend me, of course, because he never did. He just sipped his drink like he was waiting for the moment to pass. "And Eric?" He chuckled under his breath and said, "Yeah, Jenna's always been the weird one. Remember how she used to line up her stuffed animals like she was holding a trial or something?" I smiled, wide enough to show teeth but not so wide it could be mistaken for genuine, and nodded slowly. My heart didn't pound. It didn't ache. It just shifted gears, like it had done this route so many times before that it barely needed instructions. I reached down into my purse, the same cheap leather bag I'd carried on the flight over, and pulled out the envelope. I placed it on the table in front of me, not dramatically, not with a flourish, just a quiet, deliberate motion that made the air feel colder for a moment. The envelope was plain white, thick, slightly bent at the corner from travel. On the front, I had written in block letters with a black pen, "To the parents of the child who earned it." My mom squinted at the label, her head tilting slightly like a cat noticing something it doesn't understand. My dad raised his eyebrows and leaned forward. Eric snorted. "What is this?" My mom asked, reaching for it. "You said he earned it," I said, keeping my voice even, almost casual. "So I figured you might want proof of what I earned." They chuckled, lightly, awkwardly, like it was some inside joke they hadn't caught up with yet. My mom opened the envelope first. Inside were 12 neatly stapled packets. Financial statements, bank transfers, email chains, copies of my credit report. A spreadsheet I had color-coded by year, with notes in the margin and one line highlighted in red. My father pulled a page out, held it up to the light like he didn't trust his eyes, and then again when he saw what it said. Eric leaned over to peek, still smirking until he saw his name. Until he saw the amounts. Until he saw the dates that lined up with those wild weekends in Vegas, the emergency "I need help" texts I used to get at 2 in the morning. The spreadsheet showed how many thousands of dollars I'd paid off on loans taken out in my name. Loans I never applied for. Loans that had my father's signature on them as a co-signer, even though I never gave permission. One of the entries was circled in red, a $3,600 loan dated 2 months after Eric dropped out of his second college. I looked at them all, their faces frozen in various shades of confusion and dawning panic, and said, "It took me nearly 4 years to gather everything. I started when I was 29, and I'm 31 now. So yeah, 3 years of this crap." That was the moment the room cracked open. Not with noise, but with weight, like someone had dropped a stone into a still lake and we were all just waiting to see how far the ripples would reach. My mother set the pages down slowly, like they might burn her hands. My father said nothing. Eric's face had gone pale in that particular shade of denial he wore when reality didn't bend the way he wanted. Nobody said thank you. Nobody said sorry. Nobody asked how I'd known what to look for or how long I'd known. They just stared at the table like maybe the paper would rearrange itself into something easier to swallow. I wasn't angry, not in that moment. I was something colder, sharper, cleaner. I was tired of carrying the story of what they did to me and still being the one blamed for not smiling enough. My dad looked up at me like I'd just set the house on fire. The first sound that broke the silence was the rustle of paper in my mother's trembling hands, but it was quickly swallowed by Eric's voice rising across the table, cracking somewhere between fury and panic as he leaned forward and said, "What the hell is this supposed to be, Jenna?" His face flushed the same shade it had turned the night he got arrested for fighting outside that bar and swore the other guy threw the first punch, even though 3 people said otherwise. His voice was louder now, trembling with that kind of self-righteous anger that only comes when someone who's been shielded their entire life suddenly feels exposed. "You think this is cute?" he spat, standing up now, eyes darting between our parents like he was waiting for them to jump in and save him, to tell him this was all some misunderstanding, that I'd gotten it wrong again. "You ambushed the whole family. On Thanksgiving? Seriously?" He laughed once, bitterly, a hollow sound with no real conviction behind it, and added, "You're so damn dramatic, Jenna. This is pathetic." I didn't respond right away. I let the silence stretch until it pressed up against the windows and filled the corners of the room like smoke. My mother was still sitting, her mouth slightly open, blinking too fast like she could just flutter her way out of this moment. My father hadn't moved, hadn't said a single word since he read the circled line with his own signature above mine, a signature I never gave, on a loan I never knew existed until the bills started showing up 2 years ago with my name on them and a credit score that had dropped 80 points. "You think I didn't recognize your handwriting?" I finally said, my tone flat, almost bored, like we were talking about the weather and not the small thefts that stacked up into years of financial sabotage. "You always sign your G like it's choking." I turned to my father and added, "And you think I wouldn't notice a $3,600 dip in my checking account when I hadn't even bought groceries that week?" Eric was pacing now, hands gesturing wildly, trying to spin a story I'd already unraveled. "It wasn't like that, okay?" he said, his voice cracking in places he couldn't cover with charm. You once said, you'd help me out. That's what family does, right?" He turned toward Mom for backup, but she was staring down at the paperwork again like she could will it into saying something different. "I said I'd help you with rent once," I replied, shaking my head. "Not sign my life away to cover your gambling habit and your idiotic investments in crypto schemes with names like Dogbuzz or whatever the hell it was." That one hit. His mouth twitched. My mom finally found her voice, but it came out brittle and soft, like it was borrowed from a version of herself she'd forgotten how to be. "We didn't know," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "We didn't know he was using your name." I looked at her then, really looked at her, and I think it was the first time in years that I allowed myself to see how small she had become, not physically, but emotionally. A woman who had spent so long convincing herself her son was a good man that she hadn't noticed how many people he had stepped on to keep that illusion alive. You signed the paperwork, I said, more gently than I expected. You co-signed. You didn't even ask me. My father, still unmoving, finally let out a long breath. It sounded like something dying. I thought you knew, he mumbled. He said you knew. Of course he did. Of course Eric said that. Because Eric always knew how to say just enough of the right thing to the right parent to get them off his back and keep me carrying the fallout. I'd been doing it for years, the quiet fixes, the bank calls, the legal advice I paid for myself, the endless emotional cover-ups to protect the family's delicate balance of denial. You wanted to know why I'm distant? I said, my eyes back on my mother now, who had started crying but still hadn't apologized. This is why. Because every time I screamed, you turned the volume down. Every time I waved a red flag, you ironed it into a white one. Eric tried again, stumbling through a new version of his story, something about being desperate and not meaning for it to go that far, but I stopped listening. I had heard enough of his desperate pleas and half-lies over the years to fill a library. He was still trying to make it my fault, still treating my pain like a problem I created by acknowledging it. I didn't do this to hurt anyone, I said finally, my voice now colder than before. I did it because I'm tired of bleeding in silence while you all pretend it's tomato sauce on the tablecloth. My mother sobbed harder. My father rubbed his forehead like he could push the shame back in. Eric sat down again, defeated for now but still refusing to look guilty, just inconvenienced. And just when it felt like the storm had crested, just when they thought they'd seen the worst of it, I cleared my throat and said quietly, but the biggest reveal wasn't even in the envelope. The thing about truth is it doesn't always land like thunder. Sometimes it sinks slowly, like water rising around your ankles until one day you look down and realize the floor is gone. That's the look they all had on their faces now, stunned and wordless, not because they didn't know what I'd said was true, but because I'd finally said it out loud and left them no room to repackage it into something easier to digest. The illusion had cracked, and the cracks didn't stop spreading. The more they tried to ignore it, the louder it screamed. I sat there for a moment longer, not because I was unsure of what to do next, but because I wanted to give them a chance. A chance to say something, anything, that might resemble real accountability, not panic, not excuses, not another round of blank stares and soft sobs meant to make me feel like the villain. But nobody reached for it. My mom's tears had turned inward, more a performance of devastation than true regret. My father, always the quiet accomplice, kept rubbing his temples like he could squeeze an apology out of his own guilt. And Eric? He had that wounded look, the kind that demanded comfort without ever offering it in return. He was waiting for someone to say he was still the good guy. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care if anyone did. I reached into my purse one final time, past the documents, past the neatly folded note I thought I might read but no longer needed to. What I pulled out was a flash drive, small, silver, unassuming, but heavier in my palm than it should have been. I laid it on the table next to the wilted centerpiece of fake leaves and melted candle wax and said, "There's one more thing. Something I thought about deleting 100 times, but didn't. I think you should hear it." My mother sniffled, confused, her fingers twitching toward the drive as if it were radioactive. My father looked up, finally, his eyes narrowed in a way that suggested he already suspected what was coming. Eric leaned forward, skeptical, the smirk creeping back like a reflex. I didn't wait for them to ask what it was. I reached into my phone, opened the file, and hit play. The voice that filled the room was my mother's, sharper and younger, but unmistakable, laughing into the phone, not with me, but about me. "Jenna's always so damn serious," she said, her voice casual, half distracted, probably folding laundry or stirring soup while she dismantled me one sentence at a time. "She acts like everything's a crisis. Maybe if she had a boyfriend, she wouldn't be so intense." Then came my father's voice, chuckling low in the background. "She gets that from your side," he said, not unkindly, just dismissive. Like I was a flavor they didn't like, but tolerated for family dinners. But the voice that followed was Eric's, clearer, cockier, and utterly devoid of shame. "She'll never say anything," he said, laughing. "She's too weak. Always has been." I watched their faces as the audio played. My mother's eyes widened in horror, but not the horror of recognition, the horror of being caught. My father turned pale, and Eric reached for the phone like he could pull the words back inside the device and pretend they never happened. I ended the playback before it finished. They didn't need to hear more. The point had been made. "You recorded that?" My mother gasped, her voice cracking with disbelief. "I didn't record it," I said, standing slowly, my napkin sliding from my lap onto the floor without me caring. "You left a message." "I never deleted it." There was a long pause after that, long enough to hear the wind outside push against the windows and the old pipes creak somewhere deep in the house's bones. Nobody moved. Not even Eric, whose confidence had finally run dry. "I didn't come here to blow everything up," I said, pushing in my chair out of instinct, though I knew I wouldn't be staying long enough to care. "I came because I needed to stop carrying this around. For 10 years, I made excuses for you. I made space for your mess, your silence, your golden child complex. But I'm done." My mother tried to stand but didn't. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again. Eric sat like a statue, unsure whether to apologize or deny. I looked at the car through the window, the shiny new symbol of loyalty bought and paid for in ignorance, and let out a short breath that felt like freedom cracking through ribs that had grown too tight. "The car," I said, one hand already on my coat. "Yeah, he earned it. Just like I earned my freedom." I didn't slam the door on the way out. I didn't want drama. I didn't need screaming or threats, or even closure wrapped in a pretty bow. I walked to my rental, started the engine, and sat there for a moment as the house behind me fell into the quietest it had been all day. And just like that, the golden boy's crown slipped, and nobody rushed to catch it.